Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Chris Brown, Associate Publisher for Automotive Fleet. I'll be your moderator. We encourage you to ask questions and go ahead and put them in the chat box. I think you know the drill by now. We will have a Q&A session directly following the presentation. If we don't get your question, we'll be sure to email you a response. So, okay, what is today's webinar about? The title is Predict Your Fleet's Accident Reduction and ROI. It's presented by Netrodyne. But what are we getting at? What are you going to learn today and digest? So obviously we're talking about safety. We all want our drivers to get home safe. We want to reduce accidents. And we want to motivate our drivers to get there. But how do we really engage them? So often it seems like we're motivating through fear. But is that really the most effective way? Well, today we're going to talk about gaining buy-in for your drivers and positive engagement. I'm going to stop there because we've got a great presentation. I'm going to introduce Adam Kahn, CBDO for Netrodyne. Adam, welcome.
Hey, good afternoon. I enjoy that you chuckle at the title. It's a Chief Business Development Officer, but you can almost call me any title you like at Netrodyne. So that's fun.
Fair enough. Adam, I'm going to let you take it away, and we're going to pick it up after the presentation. So have at it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the time. So my time at Netrodyne, I'm a single-digit employee, and I definitely come from the space. I think I counted the years. I might be in my 25th or 30th year in transportation. My father worked for Ford Heavy Truck. So I was the kid who grew up with the original trucker hat, the Ford patches on my knees and all that. So I had early exposure to, one of the greatest industries that we have here in the United States is the commercial fleets and how they move people and goods. And, over the past 7 to 10 years, I've been deeply involved in video telematics. And, I've really made the connection between the technology that is available and advocating for drivers. And that's a little different than maybe other safety systems. Unfortunately, they didn't have all the technology pieces, so they did the best they could where they pointed out negative things for people to address. But I think we're really entering this new phase of driver engagement where we know more, we have more data, and within that data set is what the drivers are doing right. And I think it's vastly important. We have the title here that says Predict Your Fleet's Accident Reduction. Well, nobody can predict it without setting up the right infrastructure around how you want to engage drivers. And, so the more engagement, the more awareness, the more connection, you're not predicting anymore. You're setting the tone, for positive performance. And I think that's really, the theme that we're going to talk about here is leaning into, the changing environments that we have, but doing it in a very in a very, way that we partner with your remote workers. So let's, Chris, I just want to make sure that I have the slides all running up because the first thing I really want to talk about is, I had a conversation with one of our sales guys, and he was talking with a prospect, and I asked him, I said, why did the fleet call us? And he goes, well, I don't know. I have to look at my notes. But I think when we all think about accidents, it's following the money. And the attack on commercial fleets comes in two ways. One is, there's increasing overhead to run a fleet. But we have a much more aggressive plane of attorneys that go after commercial fleets. They don't like to lose. They're in the business of winning and making money. And so they find ways to really exploit maybe holes in your operation. And I took this picture. I was in El Paso, and I'm visiting one of our really good customers, and I'll talk about a case study that I have from that customer later in this chat. But right outside of their headquarters is this sign that says "Hit by a truck, call Chuck," and they're all over the place. And what I'm seeing is these elevated verdicts that are happening. And as an example, this is a report that showed the average, the top 5 accident causes and their respective payouts. And in this case here, one of the pieces that I'm going to highlight here is asleep at the wheel. Asleep at the wheel with a $500,000 payout. If you think about your financials of your company, if you're a 5 or a 10% net margin business, it's quite a bit of dollars that you have to increase on your revenue line just to break even from that verdict. So, the money is not only the damage that you have to write a check, but it's the extra effort to get back to where you started. And so I do think that one of the opportunities that I would encourage everybody is really look at what is your spend on accidents. And we'll talk about the different types of accidents. But one is just understand the money that's being sent out. And do you really feel comfortable that every time you write a check, was there an opportunity where you're really at fault? And sometimes you don't know and you have to write a check. And sometimes you're at fault and you have to write a check. And I think those are different emotions. But the piece that I think is, I always like to sort of interact with audiences. And, this was very interesting because I'm also keenly aware, Chris, that every fleet has different characteristics, right? Every fleet has different driving patterns. Every fleet has a different profile driver. So it's not us as industry technologists coming out and saying, hey, just put down the cell phone and you'll have less accidents. Because in some cases, there's different factors that really hit your fleet a different way than other fleets. And so, again, a self-audit of the types of accidents you're having, where your drivers are driving, where they're getting kind of hung up is really important. Because all this starts to get into what I consider is dead money. And dead money, and I had a conversation, this is early days of Netrodyne. I was talking to one of our early customers, and I asked him the question, I said, do you know who your top 10 best drivers are? And he said, no. But I do know who my top worst drivers are, because they're in my office every week, and it feels like, I have a checkbook that follows those drivers for the bad habits they have. That's all dead money, right? Dead money is what I consider, like I've talked to some fleets, Chris, where they say, oh, we have $2 million budgeted every year just to pay off, claims against the company that we can't defend. Well, $2 million is a lot of money. It's a lot of money, right? So you could go buy another set of new trucks. You can pour that money into driver services to keep your drivers retained. You can pour that into facilities for driver recruitment. There's technologies that you can invest in. Having wasted money is not good business. And so, again, this whole section I'm really talking about is just be honest, look inward, and say, hey, where are we having problems and how much are we spending on that money? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to go to this next slide here. The piece that we really want to start talking about, I think, Chris, is where can technology start to insert itself to make you much more efficient and more protected and mitigating some litigation. So I think that more so than ever, so when I first started in the industry, the telematics systems we had were satellite communication domes, great product by an industry leader. But the data flow that was coming through, and I'm not even joking here, was bits, right? Single characters were being counted. Now we're talking about the amount of data that's megabytes and gigabytes of data. That's magnitudes of thousands and tens of thousands multipliers of what we had before. So understanding the data, having exposure to the data, having it used as an assist to you. I really think technology should not be looked at as, hey, I'm going to put something in my trucks to monitor my drivers. I'm going to put something in my vehicles to understand the driving conditions, right? And so I think that's a really important talking point also to drivers, in the sense that it brings comfort to them, right? I'm not looking to spy on you. I'm not going to sit at my desk and watch you drive 8 hours a day. I have better things to do than that. But if I can understand what happened in those 8 hours versus maybe 2 minutes of questionable driving, I think context really matters. And I think that's where technology really comes into play and provides a much more transparent conversation, a little bit more fair and balanced. So I'm going to walk backwards in the history of safety. And I was given this presentation a couple months ago, and I peeked at the dates of this study. So if you've ever been involved in safety, you've probably seen some triangle that sits on some vendor's webpage talking about the Heinrich triangle. Well, this was a study that was done about 100 years ago. I just did the math, maybe just a couple of years under 100. But Dr. Heinrich really set off to say, I want to prove scientifically that when you do unsafe acts repeatedly, that they statistically increase the risk factor that employee has of having something worse happen. So it's not, it seems very intuitive today, but 50 years later, another researcher, Dr. Bird, looked at it and redid the study. And Chris, I'm going to give you a sneak peek on the difference between the two studies. 100 years ago, there was 3 bands here. 50 years, he expanded it to 5 bands. So that was the big advance that this study kind of happened. One of the things that I know here at Netrodyne, we sat down one day and we really looked at this study. And I might make the bold, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, but I might make the bold claim that this triangle might be incomplete. And here's the example that I have. So let's focus on unsafe acts. Unsafe act, I'm going to pick on distracted driving. So Chris, you leave your house, you go to the supermarket, you're listening to a ball game, you want to have the baseball game on, you're following the score on your phone, and now you're getting very comfortable being distracted in driving, right? So the more that you get uncomfortable with an unsafe act puts you into these riskier situations. What I might suggest is, as a fleet manager, I might say to you, hey, Chris, last month I saw that you had 10 driving events where you were looking at your cell phone. And not every system can pick this up, but really look for the systems that can look at these activities, because I think you really want to focus on the full driving experience. But so Chris, in this example, you had 10 events last month. I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to coach you. I'm going to say, Chris, what do you think about a 50% reduction in your activity from the previous month? Yes, I agree. We both feel good about that. But at the end of the day, if you do the math, what that tells you that I'm still okay with you having 5 alerts, where I'm really not, right? I want you to not do any alerts. And so I think the new metric is not how many bad events you do, but it's how many safe acts, and being able to track safe acts. Like how many minutes of driving. So the average long haul trucker who drives 100,000 miles a year, he or she drives 500 minutes a day. You can do the math, and I can show you the formula if you really want it, but just believe me that 100,000 miles is 10,000 minutes, divided by, but it's about 500 minutes. I'd much rather look at that 500 minutes and say, during that 500 minutes, how much time were you participating in safe acts, and create awareness around that, versus how much time were you on the phone, those 2 or 3 minutes that I'm only going to point that time period out. So I do think there's this evolution of safety philosophy that says I don't want you to do bad events, but I certainly want to encourage you to do more really positive events, which is compliant driving. Or there's a feature that we have with Netrodyne Driver Eye that's very unique to us, where we capture durational good driving. So the number of minutes driving not distracted, and we award for streaks where a driver might have 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 minutes of consecutive driving minutes without being distracted, without using their cell phone. That's how you motivate drivers, right? You motivate them through badges, through envy, through prizes, through recognition, versus, hey, that 500 minutes you drove last week or last month, you had 2 minutes of bad driving. You need to go see HR because I'm writing you up. Those are different emotional ways to receive that information. So let's talk about building the business case and kind of how we built the business case, because I think it's really important that if you can't measure it, then you can't manage it, right? So the first thing to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through like how to actually compute some of these elements and why they're important. So the first one is, if you haven't heard of the acronym APMM, it's accidents per million miles. And I'm not telling you that this is the only measurement you can do. You could do crashes per hour, crashes per day, crashes per month. But whatever the measurement is, you really want to look at the amount of activity divided by the amount of time spent. And so as an example, a commercial trucking company, an average accidents per million miles is 0.7. A private fleet is probably 0.5. A service fleet, a retail service fleet, last mile delivery is probably in the 0.3, 0.4. Every type of fleet segment has different characteristics because they operate different vehicles. They have different stopping patterns. They have different responsibilities for drivers. And again, I can't tell you that across the board, if you're below 0.7, you're crushing it. I think the goal is to have constant improvement, right? Measure, and then how do I continue to push that number lower and lower and lower? Because at the end of the day, the goal is to get the vehicle back to the terminal, to the distribution center, have a successful delivery, and bring your drivers back so they can spend time with their families every night or every week or whatever the right duty cycle is. So one of the pieces that we built, and I think this is really important because as I talked about context, in the sense of what, how do I really measure? And so when we built our scoring measurement, and again, a number of us at Netrodyne have worked for other vendors. We've worked with safety systems for a long time. I've been 2 or 3 companies where I've been deeply involved with safety. And I would tell you across the board, almost every safety score really looks at the alerts that are generated. What we did with Netrodyne and what we call driver GreenZone, and GreenZone is very purposely named because we start looking at the data that demonstrates good driving, and we give drivers credit for good driving. So the amount of time that you're driving where you're not following too close, you're not distracted, you're stopping at stop signs, you're not going through yellow lights, you're following all the road signals, and you're just being a good patron of the road. We give credit to drivers. And so one of the benefits of this methodology is that a driver who might have a slow morning and maybe generates an alert in the morning, historical systems will tag that driver and essentially say that driver had a bad day. He had an alert in the morning, and I'm going to come and get that driver and talk to them later. Well, that's pretty discouraging. What I think is a better scenario is to tell the driver, hey, you might have had a slow start in the morning. Maybe you were distracted. You couldn't get out of the house on time. You were rushed, whatever the reason is. But if I can give you visibility to that score during the day and tell you the characteristics that are affecting that score, you, driver, can start to affect that score through your driving. So, I might tell someone, hey, after the first hour of driving, you're about 20% off a goal because you're speeding too much. Well, now the driver has that information. I don't have to wait a week. I don't have to wait a month to sit down with my fleet manager, my safety manager. I have that information right now. So hour 2, I'm going to kind of pay attention to my speed. And instead of going 65, I'm going to go 55. And after hour 2, I see my score bumped up. That's immediate feedback. It's immediate gratification. It's immediate engagement. So having that mechanism in the score to immediately improve score based on driver response, I think is really important. The other piece that I think, and we talked about this, Chris, is in the sense of measuring risk, I would advocate to say, I think it's more important to say, hey, you had 99.5% stop sign compliance versus 3 alerts, right? It just feels like 99.5 gives you a better insight into the driver's comprehensive performance versus maybe isolating 1 or 2 moments where we don't understand the road conditions and maybe the driver had to make a move that caused an alert. We don't know until we sit down. But if I got feedback saying, hey, 99.5% of the day, you're super productive versus, hey, Adam, right after lunch where you kind of sloughed off a little bit, I want to talk about that. I think those are different conversations, and I think they're very meaningful. And what we found with GreenZone score is we've started to correlate to leading and lagging indicators. So what's a leading indicator? We found that within the GreenZone score, and this is a really fantastic stat, for every 5 points that the GreenZone score goes up, we recognize about a 7% reduction in severe alert KPIs, which means my score goes from 800 to 805, which means that my stop sign compliance, my stop sign alerts just went down 7%. Right? So I can directly manage the GreenZone score and know how it's affecting the risk profile of my fleet. So I think that's really important to be able to use. I've seen a lot of ROIs and a lot of methods where really smart people get in the room and they talk about, hey, I think we want to come up with a 30% savings. How do we back into it? I think that's has some risk because it's not based on real information. But if I can start to actually correlate data that says, hey, leading indicators go down when GreenZone goes up, that's great. The other one that we saw was with the GreenZone score, for every 50 points that the score goes up, it's about a 14 to 15% reduction in accidents per million miles. So now I have a score that's comprehensive. It looks at the entire driving performance, and I can directly correlate that to how to address risk and identify which risk is affecting my score. So the other piece that I think is really interesting here is the ability for that score to travel up and down the organization. We just completed a pilot with a great fleet in Miami. They had a couple hundred units, and they service convenience stores. And so in the December timeframe, it gets really busy because everyone loves their product, and they have family in town, and they just have a high demand for their product. So in December, we were working with this customer, and we saw the GreenZone score drop 10 points from the previous week. We were able to, within a couple minutes, to figure out that they had 3 drivers that hadn't driven the week before that essentially had ignored every stop sign on the road. And so that driving impact had a residual impact to the GreenZone score. And when we talked with the prospect and the customer now, they said, "Oh, that's busy time. That's the supervisors getting in the truck and trying to fill in the gaps. These aren't commercial drivers. These are the managers of the plant, the supervisors who they got 2 or 3 trucks and they're trying to just make all the deliveries." So, I think fleets having, I call it, transparent information is really important in understanding that, is it an individual problem in this case that I just described, or is it a systematic problem where across the board everybody's speeding or everybody is following too close or everyone is distracted? So I think those are really important. All right, so let's talk about the types of crashes that you might measure. And if you're a DOT fleet, you have special requirements that anytime an ambulance is on the scene, you need to report that accident. And then anytime a tow truck comes on the scene and the vehicle's not movable, you need to report that accident. Now, not every fleet is a DOT fleet. And so the third category is really this catch-all bucket of all other claims. And what I've seen is that across the board, the good news for the industry is that the number of injury accidents is about a third of the total reportables. And the dollar amount for the non-reportables is materially less than some of the other vehicles. And what we've seen in the industry, as an example, a Class 8 tractor trailer probably has less accidents, but the cost and the severity is much higher, where a last mile fleet, B2B, B2C fleet, has more accidents, but the severity is a lot less. So the first example would be, you have a vehicle-to-vehicle collision with a rollover and you shut down a highway. That's pretty expensive. The second one is I'm making a delivery to a retail store and I took out the canopy. That's unfortunate, but it's not, it's a smaller dollar amount. So in all these cases, I think recognizing where that dead money, where those claims are, I think it's really important. And so if you don't know how to compute accidents per million miles, not a problem. I might suggest that you print this, you screenshot this slide right here, tape it next to your laptop, and I think it serves as a good guide. So pretty simple. The numerator, which is the top number, which is the number of events, and then you divide it by the denominator, which is essentially the durational of time, in this case, mileage. So again, it's not terrible math, but this might be very helpful. So when we started thinking about this, again, what we didn't want to do is come up with just a PowerPoint with made up numbers. We really wanted to base this on actual customers using the product, driving like other customers do, and really benchmarking that activity. So last year, we took about 6 months. We looked at over 1 billion minutes and miles of driving, a couple 100,000 drivers, and anytime those drivers had a non-preventable accident. So we excluded preventable accidents because obviously those are not something I'm going to really hold the driver against. But I looked at non-preventable accidents, and the study essentially said when that fleet or that driver had an accident, what was the GreenZone score, right? So accident number 1, the driver had a GreenZone score of 600, so I put a pebble in the 600 bucket. Accident number 2, the driver had at 650, 700, so on and so on. As you can imagine, based on that Heinrich triangle, right? The unsafe acts become worse, as they persist. More accidents happen at lower scores than higher scores. And so this is very interesting to us because, as I had mentioned, for every 50-point increase in the GreenZone score, the accidents per million miles goes down by a certain percentage. That's not made up, right? That's based on looking at billions of minutes and miles driven, a couple 100,000 of drivers, actual data that represents a slice of the community, a slice of the segments that we work with. And so I essentially have now a correlated accident curve that I can start to do some predictions saying, hey, if the driver's score is 800, there's a magnitude decrease in accident frequency than the driver that has 600. So when we talked about predicting accidents, it's not really predicting, but it's having data to support the number that exists, right? So in these cases, 600 has one rate, 800 has another rate, and so on and so on. So as I think about the GreenZone score, and we talked about GreenZone score, this is just a sample from one of our customers, actual data, where we see that the GreenZone score, we really want that left to right, bottom to up motion, right? So we want this curve to kind of look like this. If your curve looks like this, you're getting better. It's the easiest question to ask, at the end of the day. You walk into your boss's office and they ask you, how are we doing? You're like, I have proof that we're doing better than we were previous, right? So even with the GreenZone score here, this is the same customer where I added the risk factor. And I had talked about this earlier, that not only can I look at the lagging indicators, but now I can also trace the leading indicators. So, I have plenty of proof points that I'm looking at customers that say, my GreenZone went up, and the red line here is a measurement of severe alerts per 1,000 driving minutes. And I would suggest, again, that if you use any kind of measurement, you try to normalize the data. And all that is you keep the dividing factor the same for whatever data set whatever period you have. So the big question that we had, well, okay, I know what happens when GreenZone scores go up. And I know when accidents happen and what the GreenZone scores are, and I know what leading and lagging indicators to GreenZone score. The next question I had was, well, what is the experience of our community? And I can only really draw on our community, and I'm not making a massive sales pitch here, but you have to use information that you can connect with. So I did two studies. The first study, I looked at 100 driver customers, and I left justified every, so I made all their day one starts to equal, and I aggregated the GreenZone scores, and I saw about 150 point increase. That's pretty cool. Now I know what the first year. I did the study again a second time, and I looked at 50 customers, again, left justify and everything. So now we have another data point that says, through the application of video telematics, vision-based driver recognition safety platform, my customers have about 125 to 150 point increase during the first year. That's an interesting point, because now if I know what my impact of GreenZone scores and I know what their expected journey is, I can start to predict with fairly high accuracy to say, if you can hit these GreenZone scores, then I can get very, very close to telling you how your accident rates are going to go down. And the thing about it, it doesn't come for free. And when I say it doesn't come for free, obviously after you purchase a system, there is programmatic effort that for every amount of effort that you put into the program, it pays back in multitudes. And so here's an example I kind of give you. Typically, I see the curve of that 150 points. The steepest part of the curve tends to be the first year to 2 years. And really what you're doing is you're cleaning out didn't knows. I love this term because it's, again, I early days at Netrodyne, I was invited for a driver coaching session which I felt a little nervous because I just felt like maybe there'd be some yelling and some anger, but it turned out to be very pleasant. But the driver came in and the driver manager showed the driver a couple videos and said, "What do you think about these?" And the second or third video, the driver said, "Oh my God, that guy's going to get into a crash." And he goes, "You got to do something about him." And he goes, "Well, that's you. And that was you last week." And the driver, and I'm going to steal it from him, but the driver said, "I didn't even know I was driving like that." So awareness and creating awareness and kind of cleaning your house a little bit is the biggest benefit you have. But like anything, you can clean your house better and kind of get your bad behavior, the bad habits out. But if you don't fill that void with something, unfortunately, the sneakiness of bad behaviors creeps back in. So what I would start to suggest is that you start creating a community where drivers work with each other, and you have peer groups, and you do gamification. And I would suggest one of the best practices in terms of motivating groups of drivers. And think about if I have 50 drivers in a room, and the first thing that I do is tell you that here's 5 drivers that just had a horrible month, and 3 of them need to go report to HR. And it happens, right? That's how some meetings start. And in some cases, it's to prove a point. But think about the attitude of the other 47 or 45 drivers in the room. They're on the edge of the seat. They want to get out of that room as quickly as possible. They don't want to be there. Well, think about the other scenario that you could forecast, and it's very easy to get there, where instead of saying, here's my 5 drivers that need to be improved, I want to bring up 5 drivers who had a spectacular month. And scarcity and exclusivity create envy. So 50 drivers in a room, 5 drivers get a $50 Amazon card, a patch, a hat, a hoodie, something exclusive no one else gets. Guess what the other 45 are doing now? They're engaged. They want to know how they can be like that driver, and they want to work with the boss to figure out how to get on stage at the next meeting. So these are really important, I call it cultural things about how to engage drivers. And we have proof points. So we have proof points that we have. I'm going to actually go to this next slide first and come back to this one. So I talked earlier about these driving moments where we can track where a driver gets cut off, creates some space, has consecutive good streaks of good behavior. All of these things are really interesting because they create viral recognition, right? So they show how to do it right versus how to not do it wrong. And that's an energy thing. That's a philosophical thing. And I think it's really important. And then the science behind it says that if you have, I believe the number was, if you have 3 or 4 driver stars per month, you have about a 5% improvement in GreenZone score, right? So 5% improvement, that could, move your number up 25 points. We know that 50 points is a 14% reduction in accidents per million mile. A 5% improvement in GreenZone score just saved you 7% on accidents per million miles through the application of recognizing good driving. So I think it's interesting, the science about how data is correlated here. I did find a quote from Benjamin Franklin. He was kind enough to let me use his quote, but I think this is really interesting. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So I thought this was really, really spoke to what we're talking about here. So there are a number of things that I think that we talk about engagement in a positive way, right? So removing stress, removing friction, increasing transparency, increasing engagement. I think there's double benefit for all these activities. So Now with the technology, the new ask to defend against plaintiff attorneys is to engage your drivers at least once a day. Well, if your model was originally set up to only talk to your drivers once a month or once a quarter, you probably have one person who's responsible for 50, 60, 70 people. And the logistics of that person talking to everyone once a day is almost physically impossible. But when I think about using technology in terms of having an in-cab audio message to say, slow down, create some space, put the phone down, or I use a mechanism where I can, in real time, either email or through a mobile app, give you some during the day visibility into what's affecting your score. And then using that same mechanism to do some remote engagement for individual coaching, all those accelerate sharing information. Sharing information equals engagement. Engagement equals better results. The other benefit of this whole infrastructure that I just described, although it has huge benefits to engaging the driver and getting them excited, it now, when you're in court, and if you run a commercial fleet, you've been to court, and the first thing the plaintiff attorney says, let me tell you how negligent this safety culture is. They allow drivers to drive around with 60, 70, 80,000 vehicles. They only talk to them once a week. They're pretty weak on their training. They never really coach the drivers, make them pay. Well, to neutralize that is time out. I do talk to my drivers. I talk to my drivers digitally every minute, hour, or week. And then, when I need to bring them in for recognition or for extra coaching, we have a whole face-to-face engagement. So I think, again, this is really this really interesting interwoven combination of technology to excite the drivers, but also to protect your fleet from litigation. And it certainly works, right? So we see great results with in-cab audio. Chris, I'll share a personal story. When we first had driver eye with following distance, the following distance in-cab alert. And I had a driver eye unit in my car. And I grew up in Michigan, and I'm not a good driver. I'll just say it right now. I like to drive fast. Barrett and I have the same car, and I know why he has his car, and I know why I have my car, because they're fast. But I like to drive fast. And when you grow up in Michigan, you drive fast, you get as close to the person's bumper in front of you, you swerve, you cut off, and then you repeat the process. Sorry, Barrett, I saw your notes there. So the system was just telling me, create space, create space, create space. And then in the second week I'm driving, I noticed that the in-cab alerts dramatically decreased. And I'm like, okay, well, what was the reason behind that? I went to our engineers and asked them what they changed. Did they change some code and all that? And they said, no, we didn't change anything. And what I did was actually took an internal survey of my driving, and I actually noticed that more people were passing me than me passing them. And so cognitively, the reminder of creating space, my brain got annoyed by all that coaching that I was getting and actually gave in and said, okay, accept it. And now it became a matter of fact. A similar story that I had, I still have a driver eye unit in my car. And my goal was to get a stop sign consecutive streak. And that is 75 stops in a row. Full stops, not California rolling stops, not, get down to 3 miles an hour, kind of roll through it, but full stops, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. I've never been hit in the arm so much by my family yelling at me to go. But I got my streak, which was fantastic, because now when I talk to drivers and I talk to fleets, I can actually tell them the effort that it takes, because I understand, the commitment to safety. But now I get a streak once a week, because what I've done is I've changed my behavior through positive engagement. So I pull into my subdivision, and I only live 2 houses away from the stop sign, but I'm stopping at 3 seconds. So let me pop through the business case a little bit, because I do want to showcase where we. Let me give you a case study. And I told you about this customer that we had. So case study here, the GreenZone improvement equals reduced risk. You see, this is the fleet in El Paso that I took the picture of the sign. I looked at their GreenZone, their risk portfolio. We did track their accidents per million miles. So this was them using a competitive system. The trajectory of that system wasn't getting better. They implemented Driver Eye. Since they've implemented Driver Eye, they've had a significant reduction in accidents per million miles, which is great. And, as I monetize that, moving from 0.54 to 0.27, that's a $4 million cost savings. So we talked about dead money. That's $4 million that I've just brought back into that operation through this activity, right? So that's meaningful, and it changes the trajectory of the types of services that you might want to, really provide, to your fleet to have a great safety environment. So this is the last slide, and we can get into. I think there's some great questions that we have. But my last advice to everybody is don't try to swallow the ocean, right? So a little progress each day equals big results, right? Eliminating small problems every day, eliminates the, I got to go work on a catastrophic problem, right? So, be patient, be transparent, be open and honest. And then celebrate along the way, right? Hey, we had a 0.1 improvement. We had a 0.2 improvement, so on and so on. Those are material. So, Chris, hopefully that was, it looked like we got about 10 minutes here that we can do some questions. And
sure, yeah.
Maybe I'll have you and go through some of this.
Questions. Let me just run down the list here. And wow, thank you, Adam. I mean, you really kind of delivered on how to really turn this into a positive. And I think some of the questions are really kind of getting into that. I have to say, my eldest son is 13, and I think I want in-cab video for him immediately when he gets behind the wheel. But
we'll help you. We'll help you out.
Yeah, seriously, thank you. The first question. Essentially what we've been talking about, right? And it's really how to offer positive recognition, because it seems like Netrodyne has kind of cornered the market on it. I'm not necessarily aware of other systems and how they do positivity. This question's a little bit open-ended, but if I can drill down on that specific to, the GreenZone. So this is good. So it's kind of like, okay, there's Bob. Bob, I want you to come in to the office because I want to have a discussion with you. Oh, Bob's worried, okay. And the fleet manager says, hey, your GreenZone scores were really good. Oh, that's the discussion? Oh, okay. The next part of the conversation is, and we want them to get better. So what is that next steps of the conversation? And we want them to get even better.
I think I've heard it before, but I've heard the term called compliment sandwich, right? So, and actually, I didn't like how the example somebody gave it to me, because they said, you're pretty smart, you could lose some weight, but you're still pretty attractive. You're a good looking man. I'm like, I didn't like that sandwich, but let me cast it in a different way. So you come in and, I say, hey, Chris, you had 85% green minutes this month, right? Maybe you had a driver start, but I know there's some percentage of what you did right? So it's confirmation that I'm confirming and I'm acknowledging you're doing, a lot. The majority of the time, every driver out there is crushing it. They're having their safety focused, and they're laser tight on their performance. What I might say is the next comment, hey, you're at 92% stop sign compliant. You think we can bump that to 95? And then at the end saying, oh, by the way, your GreenZone score, reflects this, and you're in the top third of all the drivers. So I think that's a really unique way to approach drivers versus the previous conversation was only in the middle. You had 3 alerts and do better, right? I'm in my mid 50s. My boss says, you got a minute. I come into the conference room. The first thing I think about is what did I do wrong? But I do know a fleet professional in South Carolina that he says, when I talk to drivers, sometimes my engagement's a high 5 because I know that the driver is actually doing well. But I do want to engage them. And so I purposely, go out of my way to say, yeah, you're crushing it. You're having a great, you're awesome. People get blown away when you just that's the approach you have.
Yeah, that's really great. Maybe you could talk. The next question is really this user's asking about driver scoring systems, and maybe you can get into how the GreenZone system is a little bit different than other systems that are out there.
Yeah, and I know that we kind of rushed through this, but I think that the element of GreenZone, which is different, is that it looks at all 5. I'm going to use that 500-minute example. It looks at all 500 minutes versus traditional risk scores or safety scores might look at the 2 to 3 minutes. And I think you just lose. And, I'll call it a legacy system might say, in the absence of an alert, you must be a good driver. Well, I think I'm not comfortable with that. I'd much rather say you're a good driver because I know you're a good driver. Yeah. Right. And I'm going to count good driving as good driving. And I think that's really the premise of GreenZone score is that, I'm looking at the entire day and I'm giving you credit for all that great work you had versus ignoring it or not bringing it up because it's a valuable tool. I mean, it's motivating.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a really good, we live with exception reporting, right? But exception reporting does not tell the whole story. I mean, that's, that's very clear. Yeah. Let me ask you about this other question here that just came in here too. And this is tricky too, because data, we get so much data thrown on us and then we're supposed to calculate an ROI. But I mean, gosh, from a fleet manager's standpoint, they're going to need a lot of help to really calculate that ROI. What are the basic steps there?
I think so. We've developed some great tools, and if anyone just, I can say I'm not in sales, but everyone should always say you're in sales. But I also kind of position myself as a resource to the industry. So if anyone says, hey, can you drop me a note? All I need is your mileage, your accidents, and the number of vehicles you have. And at that point, I can start to apply different, positive elements to the ROI tool to say, hey, are you comfortable using mobile app? Yes or no? Are you comfortable using in-cab audio? Yes or no? How about the internal camera on or off? I think all these kind of calibrate the ROI a little bit because they all have their own benefit proposition, but they also, in some cases, internal video has its own set of, every fleet has their own opinion on it. But I would offer that if anyone in the audience says, hey, I don't want to be sold, I don't want to be pitched, but I'm curious, maybe you can share a little bit of your perspective. Feel free to reach out to me, Adam.Kahn, Kahn @netrodyne.com. Send me a note. I'd be glad to just do an impromptu kind of walk through, put your data in our model and send you the results and let you kind of just use it as a reference point.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, let me just ask you too, if I may, on engaging C-suite, because we all know that safety starts from the top down. We've all heard that phrase, and it is relevant to this day. But what are the key nuggets of engaging C-suite to enact change with drivers? Does that make sense?
Well, in the C-suite, I think about our C-suite at Netrodyne, and the first person I think about anytime we're going to buy something, it goes to our CFO, right? Because he's got to write a check.
Yeah.
And I think you have to have a real conversation about like what is the realistic savings of dead money, because they know how much they budgeted for dead money, right? They know how much they spent last year, the year before that on claims, and they know what is dead money. And I think having more data versus guesswork to present that information. We've done some really interesting things where we look at the savings, and we do net present value and all the financial indicators that CFOs love. And I think that really that's where you start. And then the next piece is probably with safety or operations and HR, in the sense that I want to ensure you that I'm not going to disrupt your company and have to go, get 10 or 20, 15% new drivers because, the drivers revolted and they didn't like what you were doing. So I think in all those cases, having, factual data, history, case examples, I think it's really important. And then at that point, it's really, I'm going to kind of bring it up. I might suggest, a trial, and we do lots of trials. Yeah. And I think a trial is important because you really want to explore two things. One is, does the data and does the system align with the way that your company wants to consume data? And is the approach in alignment with how your drivers want to be engaged, right? So I think a trial really tends to answer those two questions. Can it fit into our culture? And does our team get behind it? Do we feel confident that we can have, good results because your team is engaged versus being? You always go faster if you walk next to the driver through the doorway versus pulling them through the doorway. Yeah. Right. Always. Right. So if someone wants to be next to you, you'll get better results. If you have to force them to do something, it's going to go slower. And so I think a trial really answers that question, where you choose good drivers, get the feedback. You go pick on a couple questionable drivers and get the feedback. And I think there's some really interesting things there. So,
yeah. Hey, because we have a minute, I'm just going to ask it. I got 100 units in my fleet. Is the trial with 10 of those units or more, or 5, or what?
Yeah. So I think it's different. Like if you had a couple thousand unit fleet, I would say go choose a location and equip all the vehicles in that location. Yeah. The amount of data that Netrodyne Drive ROI generates, you can get insights within a week or two with a handful of vehicles. And so a trial is not meant to become a burden on the company. You really want to overlay it and see what insights you can get from that information, and does it speak to you? Does it speak to your culture? Okay.
Yeah, good. Hey, we're going to get kicked off this platform. Someone else is probably going to come into the room. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Adam. Really, really great information. This will be archived as well. And we'll see you all next time.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.